Welcome. This is the account with the news report for day 362 on the war in Ukraine. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for all your comments and continued support. Today's news were dominated by one event only. We will go over the main updates for it in a moment. I also have one article I want to highlight. The other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, and the international developments. And before we start the report, a quick reminder about today. Today, on February 20th, Ukraine marks the Day of the Heroes of the Heavenly Hundred, commemorating the heroism of participants in the Revolution of Dignity and honoring the memory of those who died. Valery Zaluzhny, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, has recalled the values for which Ukrainians have fought then and are fighting for now. Moving on to the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. As the self-set goal of capturing Bakhmut by February 24th approaches, Russian attacks are increasing in intensity and desperation. It seems the Russian command is trying to force any success possible and is willing to pay any price for it. Casualty reports from both sides have increased over the past days. However, Russian numbers are incredibly high. Should Ukraine be able to resist this onslaught, chances are good that they will be able to gain the momentum and push Russian forces back once they have exhausted their reserves. Else, chances are high that Ukraine will have to abandon Bakhmut. The next days will be crucial for this part on the front. Generally, not much has changed today on the map. Russia made smaller gains in the north, but nothing noteworthy. Southwest of Bakhmut, an attack in the Ivanivsk direction was repelled. President Zelensky stated, "It is important for Ukraine to keep Bakhmut, but not at the cost of all the defenders' lives. While the city is being defended, Ukraine is preparing a counter-offensive." And now for the article I wanted to point out, titled David Petrovich versus Goliath. The gradual revival of the devastated village of Moshchun a year on from the Russian invasion. The battles for Moshchun, 15 kilometers from the outskirts of Kyiv, are among the most heroic events in the struggle for the Ukrainian capital. Ukrainska Pravda journalists visited Moshchun a year on from the Russian invasion to find out how people are coping in the aftermath of the destruction and whether they believe the village can be brought back to life. To start the news segment, today's big event. This morning, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry announced a surprise. Dmytro Kuleba, Ukraine's foreign minister, even cancelled his visit to Brussels amid rumors of a top official coming to Kyiv. To the world's surprise, US President Joe Biden arrived in Kyiv for a visit. I will go over some details of the visit, but as you can imagine, there was a lot reported. The BBC live ticker has all the details if you wish to read up on it. President Zelensky was filmed wiping tears from his eyes while President Biden greeted Ukrainian officials. During the visit to the Wall of Remembrance at the St. Michael's Monastery, air raid sirens were sounding throughout Ukraine. US President Joe Biden's aides tried to secretly ferry him across the border of Ukraine, but the trip was almost ruled out. Biden came to Ukraine by train from Poland. The visit was kept secret until the end for security reasons. Due to that, no phones were allowed on the trip, and only a small team of his closest aides, a medical team, security officers, and 2 journalists accompanied the president. Biden reportedly arrived in Ukraine after a 10-hour train ride from the Polish border to demonstrate his administration's resolve in the face of Russia's year-long full-scale war against Ukraine. During the visit, President Biden announced a new aid package worth $500 million and said, "Putin thought Ukraine was weak and the West was divided. He thought he could outlast us. I don't think he's thinking that right now." A plaque for Biden was unveiled on the Walk of the Brave in Kyiv. In return, he left a note in the guest book of the Mariinsky Palace, the official residence of the President of Ukraine, where he met with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Dmytro Kuleba, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, has said that the presidents of the USA and Ukraine were both satisfied with the visit in Kyiv, and it can be called a victory and a clear signal for the Kremlin. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Security Council of Russia, meanwhile claimed that Russia guaranteed the security of Joe Biden prior to his visit and lamented that the US president has sworn allegiance to a neo-Nazi regime. Meanwhile, it was reported that China's top diplomat Wang Yi is on his way to visit Moscow. And now a look at all the minor news out of Ukraine. The air raid sirens that were audible during US President Joe Biden's visit were due to the takeoff of a MiG-31K fighter jet in Belarus. The aircraft is capable of carrying the Kinzhal hypersonic missile. According to a statement by Serhiy Cherevati, the spokesman of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russia has increasingly begun using outdated equipment, such as the decommissioned BMP-1, and is now concentrating artillery fire in specific directions instead of all along the front. Andriy Demchenko, spokesperson for the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, reported that currently no offensive groups capable of invading Ukraine can be observed along the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. The Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Andriy Kostin, has stated that Russia uses sexual violence as a weapon of war and that the mass deportation of Ukrainians in the occupied territories is evidence of genocide committed by Russia. According to Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov, first there was a tank initiative, then there was a tank coalition, and a similar initiative regarding aircraft already exists. All that remains is to fill this aircraft coalition with content. He further stated during an interview with Forbes that Ukraine has yet to witness a real new offensive by the Russian Federation, but it may still happen, as the Russians are showing potential in the south. President Volodymyr Zelensky met with the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, in Kyiv today. Ukraine expects to launch a $15 billion program with the help of the International Monetary Fund. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. The National Resistance Center reports that the occupation authorities are introducing new rules for leaving the city of Berdiansk, with passes being introduced on March 1st. Energoatom reports that 600 Russian conscripts are currently stationed in a shelter of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner PMC, accused the Russian military of not supplying his mercenaries with needed ammunition, even though enough is available at ammunition depots. 6 conscripted Russian soldiers died in Kursk Oblast, Russia today, when ammunition in a dugout exploded. Alexei Navalny, Russian opposition leader and political prisoner, has published the agenda of his political platform, which include respect for Ukraine's internationally recognized 1991 borders and compensation for damage caused by the Russian war of aggression. Belarusian Defense Minister Viktor Khenin revealed plans for a people's militia and said that 100 to 150,000 Belarusians may join, however, more might volunteer. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The European Union has warned China that it sees the supply of weapons to Russia for the war against Ukraine as a red line. This was stated by the EU High Representative for Foreign Policy, Josep Borrell. The Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte is convinced that Russia will not dare to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. I think Russia understands that if they use nuclear weapons, the United States will strike back, and this response will be much more powerful. The United States is so much stronger than Russia that it simply cannot take this risk, he said. The ambassador of Israel in Ukraine, Mikhail Brodsky, and a delegation of the Israeli parliament visited Bucha today. Italy is prepared to send up to 5 fighter jets to Ukraine if other Western allies start doing so, the Italian newspaper La Repubblica reported. According to the article, Italy does not want to be the first ally to send fighter jets for political reasons, adding that this strategy will give the impression that Italy is compelled to follow the lead of the allies. The US Defense Department announced the allocation of another military assistance package to Ukraine worth $460 million. Earlier today, US President Joe Biden pledged an extra $500 million in aid to Ukraine during his surprise visit to Kyiv. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida pledged a $5.5 billion aid package to Ukraine. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defense. Russia continues to pursue several offensive axes in eastern Ukraine: Volodar, Kreminna, and Bakhmut. Casualties reportedly remain high, particularly in Bakhmut and Volodar. Specifically, the elite 155th and 40th Naval Infantry Brigades have sustained very high losses in Volodar and are likely combat ineffective. Russian forces are likely under increasing political pressure as the anniversary of the invasion draws near. It is likely that Russia will claim that Bakhmut has been captured to align with the anniversary, regardless of the reality on the ground. If Russia's spring offensive fails to achieve anything, then tensions within the Russian leadership will likely increase. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. ISW is publishing an abbreviated campaign update today, February 19th. This report forecasts the unlikelihood of significantly increased Russian offensive operations this winter based on an assessment of Russian forces already committed to active operations compared with Russia's overall ground forces order of battle. The institute states that the main phase of Russia's offensive is taking place in Luhansk Oblast, but the invaders lack the reserves to increase the scale or intensity of this offensive. According to the institute's data, Russian conventional ground forces are generally deploying and fighting in normal doctrinal formations and units rather than in battalion tactical groups or other ad hoc structures. The experts add that the Russian forces almost certainly still have some reconstituted mechanized units in reserve, but the commitment of these limited reserves to Luhansk Oblast frontline is unlikely to change the course of the ongoing offensive dramatically. According to the institute, the Russian offensive will very likely continue for some time and may temporarily gain momentum as the final reserves are committed, if they are, but will very likely culminate well short of its objectives and likely short of achieving operationally significant gains. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. For whatever reasons, Facebook is asking me to log on for displaying the report post alone. So today I display the feed instead. The threat of further Russian air and missile strikes on the entire territory of Ukraine remains high. The enemy continues to focus its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Shakhtarsk directions. On February 19th, with artillery, the Russian occupying forces shelled the city of Hola Pristan, Kherson Oblast, in order to accuse and discredit the armed forces of Ukraine. Also, in order to form a negative attitude towards the defense forces of Ukraine, the occupiers continue shelling civilian objects in individual settlements of the Kakhovsky and Holopristyansky districts of the Kherson region. The enemy continues the forced Russian passporting of Ukrainian citizens in the temporarily occupied territories of the Kherson Oblast. In particular, the Russian occupying so-called authorities in Skadovsk and Kalanchak, threatening to confiscate personal property, are forcing to speed up the process of obtaining Russian passports and re-registration of movable and immovable property business under Russian law. In the absence of a Russian passport, pensioners are threatened with being left without pension payments. As a result, local citizens experienced social tension and fear of losing their property and business. And that concludes today's report. You can find links to the articles I mentioned in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.